few of you been asking about mastering, and by no means am I an expert on mastering, but before you send your tracks out to labels you need to get them nice and loud so they stand up against everyone else's tunes. I'm just going to go through the mastering chain that is on this track. It's called Putting Down Roots, Forthcoming Warm Communications, written by Villem Mcleod, and yeah, I'll just give you a little blast. Okay, so it's like a halftime jungle flex, and just going through what we had on the master bus. Now, first things first, usually I wouldn't have anything on the master bus to start with. I'd just start writing beats, getting the beats fat, getting the bass fat, and just sort of going through. But probably about a few hours into the session, the first thing I'll put on is an Ozone Maximizer. This is just so I can see if, when the bass is coming in, that we're not getting too much distortion. Too much distortion would usually mean that the bass and the kick might not be interacting too well, so you might need to EQ either the bass or the kick, depending. It's always depending, it's never the same every time. And usually what I do is put this character clipping down to 0, leave this on nothing, and then sometimes I'll put on transient recovery, which just, sometimes when you're pushing into a limiter you lose the snap of the kick or the snare, and this transient recovery just helps bring some of that back. Not all the time I use that, only sometimes. So really all this is doing is just stopping the track from running into the red. So that's the first thing I'll put on, and then I'll probably just carry on writing the track and not really have anything else on until the track's finished, and then we're comparing them to some other people's music. This is really important. You just want to, at the end, or not really at the end, but as you're going along, just keep dipping into other people's tunes that you think their mix downs are really good, and compare like for like. One thing I would say is I wouldn't go comparing, say, a break tune to a tune like this, because they're very different in nature. This is more of a throwback to a jungle sound, so it's going to be softer, not as heavily processed, but still we want it to sound up to date and new. So we compare it to, say, people like Unit or Fracture, who are doing this kind of sound. You want to be standing up next to those guys. So yeah, once the track's finished, I'll then be looking to see what maybe the track needs. And in this particular one, I need to remind myself what I did. This is multi-band dynamic compressor. Most of the time I'll go in on the sub. So this is everything below 85 Hz, and we're going to be compressing the sub from anywhere from a little bit, which could be, say, -5, to a lot, which would be -20. And then generally what that will do, that will compress the sub, so it will bring, say, like the high bass notes and the low bass notes, it will level those out so they're not sort of peaking as much, and generally it will quieten your sub down. So we would then use the gain to bring your compressed signal back up in the mix, and it will be much more level. Without this kind of compression, I wasn't able to get as much sub as I'd like, and it was kind of compressed. It was distorting on the maximizer, which is the limiter. This just compressed the sub, leveled it out, made it more even, and then we could then boost the gain back up using this function here. Doesn't look like I did anything there. And we've got some compression around. This is kind of around your sort of top of the snare, kind of the crack of the snare area. So I probably listened to other tunes and just thought the snare needed bringing out. So we kind of zoned in on the snare, quite reasonably heavy compression, and then boosted the gain once again. Simple stuff, and nothing to the top end there. So that's just a bit of multi-band compression. I'll probably do that on most tracks just at the end, just to level out the bass. And here's an EQ, and looks like boosted around 4,100 hertz at 1.1 dB. When you're boosting with EQ on your master, you don't need a lot, and you kind of want to use fairly broad kind of boosting, so it's not going to sound sort of weird and sort of unnatural. It's going to sound like just a gradual boost over the overall mix, just to get it a bit brighter. This fizz here, I mean, this is just coming from some of the plugins, and you don't need to worry about that. So yeah, that's just making the overall mix a bit brighter. I mean, around this kind of area, which is like your kind of sort of mids, this is always going to make your tune appear louder. You can sort of boost around here without it distorting quite a bit, and it's always going to make your tune sound louder. But you have to be careful, because sometimes when you boost, it starts making the tune sound sort of boxy, like it's kind of in a weird kind of room when you start boosting too much. So you just have to be very critical, very careful, just like keep A-Bing backwards and forwards. Especially if you haven't got a treated room, then you need to A-B a lot, and also go into headphones, take your tune into your car stereo, take it into your living room, play it over your TV, you know, just as many different places as possible until you think your tune stands up to everyone else's. And the last thing I did was use this Brainworks Control, and this just makes everything under 100 Hz in mono. Don't really want sub in stereo, especially if it's been cut to vinyl. One thing I will say is all of this gets taken off, and then I bounce a pre-master, which is at -10 dB, so it's very quiet. Give it to a mastering engineer who's got way more experience and way more gadgets than I have, and let him do all this. But this is just good to get in practice for sending it out, getting it sounding as professional as possible, and then the labels will, you know, be able to take the tune seriously. Like if you send a tune to a label and it's really, really quiet, it's hard for them to really compare because it sounds really quiet. So you need to get it at least sort of in comparison to tunes that you like. And this is just a bit of stereo width, just to make it just brings out the top end and gives it a little bit of width. And again, it just sounds a bit more pro. That's it. I mean, that's all that I do. It's generally always a maximizer, always compressing the sub, and then sometimes EQ, sometimes some stereo spread. Sometimes I might use some UAD plugins. Things like the UAD Shadow Hills is good for mastering, but each time's different. But your general rule is you want to limit it, and then you want to compress the sub just to control it. And yeah, that's about it. Okay, any questions, just hit me up on YouTube or Facebook, and yeah, happy producing. Peace out.